Hello students, film students, mobile phone film students, digital videography students. I'm back! Listen to this. You might not be the next Christopher Spielberg. You might not be the next Stephen Nolan. But you might go viral. You might hit 2 figures for subscribers. You might hit 3 figures. You might hit 4 figures. You might do vlogs, video essays, unboxing videos, travel videos, reaction videos. Your 3-minute video might make someone's day, or it might get buried alive. Interesting content! That's how you make the big bucks. And what's the best, cheapest way to record it? Your mobile phone. Get your phones out. That's it. Hold them aloft. Kiss them. Do it. Kiss. Do it. These wondrous pieces of technology serve as the gateways to validation, happiness, and exorbitant wealth. Those precious monies. We all worship at the altar of the monies. And who better to teach you how to shoot a film or other video content on your phone than today's guest lecturer. Here he is.
Hello everyone. A modern history of Cyprus. A quick summary of the background. 1191, King Richard, that's England, takes possession of Cyprus. 1489, the Venetians assume control of Cyprus. 1571, Cyprus is now part of the Ottoman Empire. 1878, the British and Turkish enter an alliance. The British retake control of Cyprus. Cyprus is still part of the Ottoman Empire. 1914, Britain annexes Cyprus. 1923, Cyprus is officially recognised by the Greeks and the Turks as a British colony. 1960, Cyprus becomes an independent country. Britain retains a small percentage of the island where its military bases are. 1983, the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus is declared.
Shout out, Ms. Rachel!
And in the last few years, the UK has used its military bases in Akrotiri to send planes over Gaza to spy for the Israelis. As has been pointed out by Matt Kennard and countless others, if you collect and provide information to a state perpetrating a genocide, you are fully complicit. And of course, the British public are deliberately kept uninformed by its willfully ignorant establishment media.
United Kingdom, the Republic of Cyprus. 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 We are now in the United Kingdom. In fact, Limassol Salt Lakes, which serves as home for large numbers of flamingos, isn't in the Republic of Cyprus. It's in the UK. The RSPB, however, does not list flamingos as birds you can see in the UK.
After resuming control of the Cypriots in 1878, the British colonial administration pursued a divide and rule policy, forcing Cypriots to identify as either Greeks or Turks, depending on their religious beliefs. Muslims became Turks, Orthodox Christians were classified as Greeks. Teachers were hired from Greece and Turkey to educate and inspire ethnicist ideals in their students. They taught enosis, Greece and Cyprus unification, and takism, the partition of Cyprus. The British instituted this division. Support for Cypriot independence and enosis with Greece increased rapidly throughout the first half of the 20th century. Post-World War II, the British, concerned with protecting its oil interests and its prestige in the Middle East, and in preventing a rise in support for communism, repeatedly offered the Cypriots the opportunity for limited self-government. Archbishop Makarios, a Greek Cypriot political leader and prominent campaigner for enosis, ensures these paltry offers are rejected.
Shout out, Mr. Beast!
In 1952, Turkey and Greece enter the NATO alliance. A few years later, Greek Colonel George Grievous establishes EOKA, a terrorist or Greek nationalist organisation, its manifesto to engage the British in armed struggle. Their aim was enosis. To combat this and foster division, the British decided to hire Turkish Cypriots as part of its police force and enabled the creation of TMT, a paramilitary group of Turkish Cypriots whose role was to instigate trouble between the two communities and oppress pro-independence Turkish Cypriots. TMT murdered many progressives and socialists within the Turkish Cypriot community. EOKA began its campaign against the British in April 1955. 16 bombs exploded across the country, severely damaging British infrastructure. The British responded quickly. Freedoms of speech, press, worship, assembly and association were all heavily restricted. Suspected EOKA supporters could be detained without trial. Convicted males under 18 could be whipped, villages could be fined, and property taken away. Martin Bell, doing his national service in Cyprus, observed, "The British were the world leaders in the operation of internment camps. The first had been built in South Africa in St Helena in 1900 for prisoners of the Boer War." Piers Brendan noted it was standard practice in Cyprus during the interrogation of suspects to beat them on the stomachs with flat boards, hit them in the testicles, half suffocate them with wet cloths, and otherwise abuse them. Over the next 4 years, 600 people were killed, 1,260 were wounded, and Makarios was forcibly exiled to the Seychelles.
I took national service literally and supposed that what we were doing was somehow in the service of the nation. We would do what we were ordered to do, but were totally unqualified for. Since we understood neither their cause nor their language, there was no buffer between us but violence. Theirs and ours. It was a hopeless interface and an unavoidable collision. Barbed wire was the constant barrier between us and them, the soldiers and the people. We never overcame it. We merely play our very small part in trying to keep the daily total of dead Greeks and Turks within reasonable limits, and even this comes hard on a number of regular officers who are only too delighted to see their wogs bump each other off. The British controlled the streets and the skies, and pro-government leaflets were airdropped on towns and villages in industrial quantities. In June 1958, I calculated that there must have been 1,500 detainees behind the wire. In a 4-day swoop, a further 1,800 suspects were arrested. Some of the detainees were schoolboys as young as 14. A special branch carry out their searches and interrogations of suspects. At least, interrogations is one word for it. The most used, most non-committal, and most misleading.
Then, in 1956, the Suez Canal crisis, in which the British launched the invasion of Egypt from Cyprus. 3,000 Egyptians would die, the British lost 27 men, and its dominant role in the Middle East. And unfortunately, we don't have enough time to get into that.
Shout out PewDiePie!
The British needed to find a solution to the Cyprus question. They enlisted the assistance of the US, stressing the need to keep a hold of its facilities for NATO's usage against the Soviets. With the base's intelligence technology, early warning radar and nuclear strike capability, they were invaluable to both the UK and the US.
In one incident, in July 1958, a patrol of soldiers shot and killed a blind man in a crowd of stone throwers. In another, a young British Army officer recorded seeing 150 soldiers indiscriminately kicking Cypriots as they lay on the ground and beating them in the head, face, and body with rifle butts. I stopped making excuses for the methods being used and recognised armed repression when I saw it. It dawned on me for the first time in my life, and I have become convinced of it since, that the application of armed force is always problematic and usually futile. Firepower intimidates, but it does not win people over or change their minds. It was an assault upon the people. National service was about to end, and with it the army's supply of abundant and cheap manpower. The empire was shrinking, and conscription was politically unpopular and no longer affordable.
Turkey and Greece's long-standing animosity meant the Turkish were unwilling to accept enosis. Archbishop Makarios, a political pragmatist, changed tact, opting to declare his support for Cypriot independence and, publicly, no longer insisted on enosis. At this point, none of the countries with a major interest in Cyprus support its quest for independence. Nevertheless, on the 16th of August 1960, the Republic of Cyprus is established. Political control was to be divided between the Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots, with Makarios as president and Turkish Cypriot Fasli Küçük as vice president. The independence agreement was as flawed as you'd expect. Over half of the sizable document was dedicated to allowing the British usage of its military and intelligence facilities, with full sovereignty over these geographical areas. The British could use Cypriot roads for movement of troops as and when they wished, they could fly in Cypriot airspace, they could take over Cypriot airfields in emergencies, and continue to install intelligence systems throughout the Cypriot territory. Cypriot police weren't allowed to arrest anyone on British territory. These arrangements also suited the Americans, who had been secretly using their own intelligence facilities in Cyprus.
Shouted like Nastya!
In government, the Turkish Cypriots, despite their minority, had use of a veto in areas such as the economy, foreign affairs and defence. This hindered the Cypriot government's ability to achieve anything of substance. Frustrated by this political stalemate, Makarios proposed a drastic change to the constitution in 1963, effectively eliminating some of the rights of the Turkish Cypriots. Neighbouring Turkey rejected these proposals outright. Fighting broke out, the conflict had begun. On the third day of this civil war, 17 Turkish Cypriots and 11 Greek Cypriots were killed. Turkey threatened a full-scale invasion unless Turkish Cypriots were protected. A British truce force was hastily assembled to intervene and stop the fighting. By this point, around 26,000 Turkish Cypriots had left their homes.
Neriman Jahid. Explain to me, my teacher, without hiding a word, why are grown-ups fighting? Why do they kill each other without pity? At the building plot next to us, we too fight against neighbouring friends. We too shoot our enemies. We too seize them and put them in a jail. But our guns are made of wood. They don't kill what we shoot at. For us, death is just a joking play. Explain to me, my teacher, grown-ups must be wiser than us. Yet, how can it be, my teacher? How come that they fail to be as fair as us, as fair as the children?
Archbishop Makarios requested that a UN peace force be assembled. However, anxious to avoid any of the communist nations gaining a foothold on the island, the UK and the US wouldn't allow it, insisting instead on a NATO peace force. Eventually, however, a UN peace force arrived on the island, pacifying the Turkish, which prevented a potential outbreak in fighting between them and Greece, which NATO wanted to avoid at all costs. Behind closed doors in Washington on the 8th of February 1964, US officials came up with a contingency plan, which would allow Turkey to invade Cyprus and take control of most of the north of the island. Partition. From this point onwards, the US works towards partition as a suitable goal for Cyprus.
Shout out Markiplier!
Meanwhile, the British truce force, led by Packard, had made incredible advancements, talking with both communities and had arranged for a large number of Turkish Cypriots to return to their shared villages. This didn't suit Turkey, who, by this point, favoured a separate state for the Turkish Cypriots. 12 hours before the first wave of Turkish Cypriots were to return to their homes, Packard was ordered off the island by the British top brass, vaguely citing his safety and even fabricating allegations of womanising.
Fikret Demirag. The long march of poetry continues in my country where losses accumulate in lakes, with sorrow one within another, with hope side by side. The long march of poetry continues under the shadow of guns and olives, leaving behind the blood stains of so many poets, in the name of suffering of those too who are being drowned in their own inner voices.
Eager to placate Turkey, which housed 26 US intelligence sites designed to monitor the Soviets, the Americans turned their attentions to ousting Makarios by convincing the Greeks he was an enemy of their interests. Accordingly, Colonel Grievous, leader of the EOKA, was dispatched by the Greeks to Cyprus with one purpose: to get rid of Makarios. As the major powers secretly worked out how to divide the island, Makarios attempted to drum up international support for his fight for self-determination in government by a simple elected majority. He found support from the Soviets and other non-aligned states.
Shout out, dude, perfect!
Again, in the August of 1964, heavy fighting broke out as the Greek Cypriots attacked Turkish Cypriot positions, attempting to break their resolve and remove Turkish influence from the island. In response, Turkish jets allegedly dropped napalm on Greek Cypriot villages, wiping some out entirely. 55 Greek Cypriots would die, 103 Turkish Cypriot villages lay in ruins. The island was disunited, the communities separated. A tentative ceasefire was agreed and a tenuous peace resulted.
Jenin Zelchuk. A gravedigger who's fastidious in his duties, I keep coming back to bury my dead. From the village, my lost childhood runs to meet me, a bundle of memories in his hands. The only child, friendless, he never complains. I nurture my roots with muck he's gathered. In my absence, it's him my father smacks around. It's him my mother tends.
In April 1967, a military coup in Greece, consisting primarily of right-wing generals, seized control of the country, solving a problem for the US, who were concerned that victory for the left-wing party at the upcoming election might lead to the removal of US bases in Greece. It was the first example of a NATO country transitioning from democracy to dictatorship. The Americans were unsurprised. The leader of the coup had been on the payroll of the CIA since 1952.
Shout out Blackpink!
Concerned with securing his presidency, Makarios negotiated a deal with the US, formally recognising US military facilities on Cyprus. The CIA paid Makarios a yearly amount of $1 million to spend as he liked. In February 1968, Makarios contested an election against a pro-Enosis candidate. Makarios won 95% of the vote, with turnout at 90%. And shortly later in the US, the Nixon presidency begins. The dictatorship in Greece privately receives his wholehearted backing. They had funneled funds to his election campaign through a famous Greek businessman, who Nixon would later turn to try and pay off the robbers before becoming embroiled in the Watergate scandal.
Nisse Yasin. Time erases. Memories are a receding ship. Storm, earthquakes and whirlwind. Little girls overcome them all. The streets a home to strangers, perhaps more of a sibling. The utmost truth the heart tells when fathers go away, children see their own shadow. You who never forgave, even crimes we never committed. I didn't conform to the book of destiny you wrote. I chose myself. You bent while pliant. How you hurt my branches. Yet I am afraid that one day you'll die. Your broken, crumbled little girl is growing, and fathers are getting old.
In February 1970, Makarios faced and survived the first assassination attempt on his life. His helicopter hit by bullets and having to crash land. He held elections shortly after. His party achieved 15 of 35 parliamentary seats. The Communists took 9, the Socialists 2, and the pro-Enosis party 7.
Shout out Fede Vigevani!
Over the next few years, high-level talks would take place between the Greeks and the Turks, encouraged by the Americans, aimed at agreeing upon the division of Cyprus through double Enosis. The elected and well-supported Makarios proved the major obstacle. During this period, the British had faced economic crises and had repeatedly tried to shelve the financial responsibility of the upkeep of the Cypriot bases by relinquishing their sovereignty. Tom McNally, the advisor to then British Foreign Secretary James Callaghan, states plainly that every time this was attempted, the Americans insisted the British keep them.
This, and everything you can see around here, is part of the United Kingdom. We had to stop recording at this point, as all photography is strictly forbidden around Akrotiri RAF. This tiny speck in the sky is a plane leaving Akrotiri RAF. In this shot, we were simply trying to convey a sense of what life is like in the village Akrotiri when this plane invaded our frame. We were not trying to film the plane, nor did we begin speculating about whether it was going to spy over Gaza, which it probably was. Lately, there has been an increase in Cypriot protests against the United Kingdom's sovereign bases, targeted primarily at its support for the Israeli genocide of Palestinians in Gaza. Alas, the Republic of Cyprus can do nothing about this. It might be their country, but it's not their territory.
In 1974, out of desperation, the Greek colonels sanctioned the return of Grievous to Cyprus, who promptly formed EOKA-B and began committing acts of terror against Makarios and his supporters. On the 2nd of July, Makarios delivers an open letter to the Greek dictatorship as follows. More than once I have sensed, and on one occasion almost felt, the invisible hand stretched out from Athens seeking to destroy my human existence. At this point, Cypriot officials make it clear to the US ambassador that the CIA are funding EOKA-B's attempts to get rid of the Castro of the Mediterranean.
Shout out 5-minute crafts!
And finally, on the 15th of July 1974, gunfire and explosions break out across Nicosia. The coup had begun. A few hours later, the Cyprus radio broadcast announces that the National Guard, comprised of Greek soldiers, had taken over the country and that anyone who puts up resistance will be shot. Archbishop Makarios, thought to have been killed, somehow escaped. His supporters valiantly fought back, but were arrested in large numbers by the puppet installed by the Greeks.
Neriman Jahid. Since you were blown to the south and me to the north, I am tired, my neighbour, of the sacrifices of the gods of war and the memorial candles lit in our churches and mosques. I'm tired. Open your heart and listen to the wounded sounds of the soil of life. Its motherly tone is whispering to you of love and forgiveness. Come. From the darkness of hatred and blind anger, let's open our rusty hearts to peace.
So, this is the beginning of the end of the disastrous conclusion for independent Cyprus. Turkey invades, and within a week of the coup, it occupies a large part of the north of Cyprus. By the time a ceasefire is agreed, Turkey had taken control of around a third of the island. 200,000 people had been displaced, 4,000 Greek Cypriots were killed, and the few remaining villages where the communities had peacefully coexisted were finally splintered. The Greek dictatorship had been caught unawares and were shocked and totally unprepared for the Turkish invasion. Clerides, former Cypriot president, believed, I think probably the CIA gave them the impression that if they ousted Makarios, they would not allow Turkey to invade. As it turned out, Turkey's tactics were remarkably similar to those designed by the Americans in their contingency plan 10 years earlier. On that note, on the 13th of August, Henry Kissinger, US Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, commented to President Nixon that there is no American reason why the Turks shouldn't have 1/3 of Cyprus. The very next day, the ceasefire failed and Turkey continued its advances towards the city of Famagusta. After gaining yet more territory, the Turks would call for another ceasefire. By this point, the UK had lost 12 of its 31 military intelligence sites in Cyprus. The US, however, had retained all of theirs, including those in the occupied Turkish north. It was then the turn of the West's diplomats to work overtime to ensure that the Greeks and the Turkish didn't go to war with one another, thereby salvaging NATO's Eastern Front. Upon reflection, Clerides noted of the CIA, first they would get Makarios, whom they did not look on favourably because of his relations with the Eastern Bloc countries, out of the way. Then also in this way, part of Cyprus will be occupied by Turkey and the other would go to Greece. Partition, finito, the Cyprus problem. And there you have it. Turkey began its settler colonial project. 36% of the island is occupied by the Turkish military and the Turkish Cypriots in North Cyprus. The British retained its 2 bases and 3% of the island. 4% of the island is the UN buffer zone separating the 2 communities, and the remainder of the island is the Republic of Cyprus, an independent state with control of only 57% of the entire island. Looks like we've run out of time. Hopefully that was of interest to some of you. Okay, I've realised I'm in the wrong room. This is the filming on your phone thing, isn't it? Shit.
It is thought that Turkish settlers now outnumber Turkish Cypriots in the north of Cyprus. Many of these illegal settlers are used by Turkey to oppress Turkish Cypriots. They help Turkey to control the political will and have carried out assassinations and lynching attacks on political figures, journalists and media outlets. Rebecca Bryant and Kristalla Yakinthou gauged the opinions of Turkish Cypriots on their situation. A journalist. The structure here is a representative structure, and this is actually Turkey's subordinate administration, even like a province of Turkey. A legal expert. There's probably no other country in the world that receives this much immigration from the country that's keeping them as its protectorate. In fact, it's usually the reverse, and it's the guardian country that receives that immigration. A businessman. The governments here, after they come to power, are just interested in pursuing good relations with Turkey in order to stay in power. A trade association leader. The Cypriot Turk is Muslim, but doesn't really concern himself with religious practice. For instance, they say instead of building a mosque, build a school or a road. That is, we have more important priorities. A union leader. In the past 3 years, because of the economic package imposed by the current Turkish government, there's been a growing impoverishment in Cyprus. Persons working at minimum wage are struggling to get by, and there hasn't been an increase in the minimum wage in 2 years. An editor. Turkish Cypriots have no voice in the Republic of Cyprus. Turkish Cypriots also have no voice in the Republic of Turkey. On the 2nd of January 1961, Turkish Cypriot journalists Ayhan Hikmet and Ahmet Musafir Gürkan published the following text. Our country, our beautiful Cyprus, after complicated, long-lasting and harsh fights that were the result of conflicting interests, following the natural course of history, was liberated from the yoke of colonialism and joined the community of free nations. Therefore, the duty of every Turkish Cypriot and Greek Cypriot who loves their country and nation is to respect each other's rights, to sustain and develop independent Cyprus, and to work with all their effort to provide their community with a more democratic, prosperous, happy, and peaceful life. In brief, Cyprus's independence is not its being annexed to another nation or state, but to be governed by Cypriots. The authors were later assassinated.
We visited the Republic of Cyprus a few years ago and spoke to the owner of a restaurant in the small town of Polis near Pafos. He told us that the village he'd grown up in was ethnically mixed, that the Greek Cypriots and the Turkish Cypriots had lived together as neighbours. When we asked him if they'd got along with one another, he immediately clasped his hands together and smiled sadly. In his village at least, they had lived as one community, happily and peacefully. Phew! This filming on your phone business, if these guys can do it, anybody can.